Hi everybody. Okay, so this video is going to be about the very basics to ancient Egyptian magic. And somebody had brought up this topic, and it's a really good topic, and so I thought I would just talk about it. I don't know how long I have, so I'm going to try to make this short. And so I'm going to highlight some, and there are some things that I highlighted, and I have notes here. So if you see me looking down, I'm looking at notes. Some things that I think are very important about ancient Egyptian magic are knowing how to say a prayer to a deity. And I have a book here to help. When you address a deity, you need to be able to address that deity not only by name, but by title as well. So, let me give you an example. If you were going to address the god Khepra, and Khepra is the god of the rising sun, and he's often depicted as a scarab with wings. If you're going to address him, you would address him who came into being as the thing which came into being, and came into being in the form of one who came into being. And so it's just very, you address him like that. Oh, he who came into being as the thing which came into being, and came into being in the form of one who came into being. It's a mouthful, but that's how you would start a prayer. Or another one. This is a goddess that I personally work with, Sekhmet, superior to whom the gods cannot be, and that's actually one of the prayers that I read whenever I invoke her or I talk to her. Supreme, Sekhmet, supreme to who the gods cannot be, and you would say it would be followed with a prayer. And last one, Isis, lady in the secret place. And this actually has something to do with how Isis gave birth to Horus, and she had to hide from Set in the papyrus swamps of ancient Egypt. And we'll talk a little bit about that when we get to the gods and goddesses of ancient Egypt. And so I just thought I'd highlight that. Another thing is that when you're addressing a deity, you don't want to insult them in any way, and sometimes the name of another deity can be insulting. So, going back to Isis and Set and Horus and Osiris, if you don't know the story, Set killed Osiris, Isis' husband, and Isis and Osiris had a child, and that child was supposed to take the throne, but since Set killed Osiris, Set took the throne and tried to kill Isis and Horus, and Horus and Isis went hiding in the papyrus fields until Horus was a grown man, and then they started a war. That's just basically the run through a little bit. But if you were going to invoke Isis or Osiris or Horus, you would not want to use Set's name and vice versa. You don't want to use Isis. You don't want to say Isis, Osiris, Horus if you're working with Set. But that leaves you very vulnerable to being attacked by something, because in ancient Egyptian magic, there is sort of a form of angel and demon, good and dark, and so we'll get more into that later too. So I'm sorry, just let me cross some things out. Don't be stupid. And this is where I come in. This is when, like what I just said, you don't want to offend the gods, and so you don't want to mix altars. And me and what Kat and Lisa teach is all very similar, because all of our things relate to one another. But so when you're working with someone, when you're going to work with a deity, you can't. When you're going to work with a deity, you can't just throw an altar together and put things that don't represent that deity on it. For example, I made a blog post about Ma'at today, and if you're going to put an altar together for Ma'at, you want to put feathers on it, and you might want to put a scale on it, or something that shows weight. You might want to put a heart scarab on it, or a heart stone, or a stone that's shaped like a heart on it. But you don't want to throw on random stuff like seashells and skulls and all of that. You don't want to throw together a random altar. Well, skulls might work because she's also a goddess of death, if you want to think about it, but she's really a goddess of immortality. But people like to see her as a goddess of death, but we'll skip that part. But you don't want to throw random stuff on an altar for her and then just call it, and then put a statue in the middle of it and say, "This is the altar to my aunt." No. The divination process. Now this one might take longer than the other one, so I might have to make a separate video for the last one. But the divination process, and this is the process that I personally go through. And I was watching The Witch's View yesterday, and Kat said that she believes that everybody should wait at least 3 days after relations before doing any type of divination or going to the altar or any magic work. And the truth is that in ancient Egyptian divination systems, there was a 3-day purification process. Now that process included spiritual bathing, celibacy, and what was the last one? Oh yes, exilement from all outside people. Now in the world where we live in, where if someone just suddenly drops off of the face of the earth for like 3 days, that means they either did something that illegal or they really got hurt. So we can't just drop off the face of the earth, but we can do 2 of those things. We can do the spiritual bathing, and we can do the celibacy. So when you're doing ancient Egyptian divination forms, and something like throwing shells, which is a form of ancient Egyptian divination, and it's also, and what Kat doesn't realize is that, like, even though my stuff is ancient Egyptian, our backgrounds originate from the same, I don't want to say same place because they don't, but they do originate from the same place. I mean, you have to think that some Egyptian influences got into some of her, I don't want to call some of the Santeria influences, because the people that started Santeria came over from Africa. So some of our stuff is intertwined in a way that is such a big deal. But yes, a 3-day divination process that included a 3-day cleansing process that included exilement, celibacy, and spiritual bathing, and all of this big, I don't know what you want to, if you want to call it a big process, but all of this process had to be carried out for at least 3 days. And then when the divination was actually to be done, ancestors would be called. And that's another big thing that Kat doesn't understand. Well, Kat doesn't know, I guess, is that ancestors were just as big a part of Egyptian culture as any part of culture. But I don't really think that's a Santeria thing. I just think that's a Kat thing. I think Kat's just really big with ancestors. But ancestors would be called to guide the shells, and to give answers, and to guide the cards, and to guide, they had their form of rune system. I'm using runes. I'm putting air quotes up because it weren't exactly runes, because runes are Nordic, Celtic, and I'm trying to think where the third set comes from, but they were like European, whereas the ancient Egyptians runes were more of hieroglyphics that had a certain meaning when used in a sentence in the right way. So like the symbol for water would look like 2 squiggles, and that would mean prosperity. That could represent the god Hapi, which is the god of prosperity, which is the god of the river, and the god of the river, and the god of prosperity, and the god of fertility. And so, yeah, it's just, these symbols meant something. The eye meant the eye of Ra, always be watchful, always be up on your guard, because the eye of Ra is a protector, so it's a warning sign. So we're going to talk about that too later. But ancestors would be called to like guide the I've never really learned what they've been called. All I know is they're the equivalent to runes. They're the ancient Egyptian equivalent to runes. I'm sorry, there was a fly. There's forever a fly in my house. But they're the ancient Egyptian equivalent to runes. So I'm going to keep calling them runes. So they would throw these runes, and they would throw them, and they would ask the ancestors to guide them. And so they used a very big room for this. Like, they used what we would consider a bedroom to do these type of readings. And considering that everything was lit by a torch, it would be really hard to read them. But they would send like assistants of the priests and priestesses. priests and priestesses doing these readings out to look for the runes and to look what symbols they laid on, and they'd come back and they'd lay them out in the way that they were found, because the way that they were found was also a big part of what the reading meant. So that's another thing. What else? How to give offerings. This is a very big thing. Giving offerings is a big deal in the ancient Egyptian way. Now, there's some similarities and some differences between the way that Kat gives offerings and the way that the ancient Egyptians, in the way that I give offerings in the ancient Egyptian way. Kat gives food offerings once a day. Well, you can give food offerings. There's no problem with that. The ancient Egyptians gave food offerings, but the ancient Egyptians also believed that after the offering sat on the altar long enough, so after you had felt like the gods had had enough of the food, or they had eaten all they needed to eat, it was okay to take from the food. And that would be a big no-no in any other type of magical culture. So, what you need to do is, if you're going to take the offerings, what you always need to do is you need to ask the god or goddess, or the deities, or the pantheon you work with, if it's okay if you take this food offering before you take it. You need to be like, okay, I think that you've had your fair share, and is it okay if I take it? Now, the Egyptian deities are, I don't want to say they're spoiled, but that's just something that they kind of have that tendency sometimes. The humblest deity that I've ever worked with is I was about to say Sekhmet, but Sekhmet is not humble. The humblest deity I've worked with is Isis and Ma'at. And the reason for that being that Ma'at is the goddess of social justice, and I made a post about her on the forum, so go check that out. But she's very humble, she's very just and fair and truth, and she's all about truth and kindness. And Isis just had a little bit of a rough time, and so she's learned to be very humble. If I ever get the time, I'll tell you guys about the 7 scorpions of Isis, because that is a very interesting tale. But when you give an offering, I give mostly scented offerings. So oil diffusers filled with certain oils. Things that I would suggest giving: sandalwood. I know sandalwood is something most of the deities love. What else? Sandalwood, rose oil is very good for any deity that is good for childbirth, or any goddess specifically oriented towards women. So that's actually quite a few. So you would give rose oil. Sandalwood would go to pretty much any deity, because most deities love sandalwood. But you would give rose oil to maybe Isis, Nefertiti, Bastet, what else? What other goddesses? Wadjet, maybe Aset. No, wait, Aset is Isis. I think that Rose is just like, I think that when you give an offering, these are just some goddesses that I would personally give them to, but I also think you have to take into consideration what else you would use rose oil for. So like, if you want to give the offering of rose oil for like love, then maybe you would give it to a specific goddess, or beauty, you would give it to the same goddess. I know that when I work with Sekhmet and Bastet, they have their own 2 special instant recipes that I like to use, and then I like to mix those oils to make their own oil recipe, and so I'll be sharing that soon. Lang Lang oil, I'll spell that out in the description, but I use it for, okay, it's an aphrodisiac, but I usually give it for as an offering to Hathor, because Hathor is the goddess of love, beauty, and sex, and Bastet is the goddess of love, beauty, and sex. So I give this offering to both goddesses, basically. For Sekhmet, I usually give instant offerings because she tends to be a little hesitant of liquids, and the reason for that is because Hathor was given Hathor is a form of Sekhmet, and Sekhmet is a form of Hathor. And that's why I worship them together. But Hathor is the more docile, calm, breathe in, breathe out side of Sekhmet. And Sekhmet is the more war goddess, destroy all in her path form of Hathor. So, I don't give Hathor liquids. I don't give Sekhmet liquids because Sekhmet was given wine by the sun god Ra, and that calmed her to the point that she became Hathor. She became so intoxicated, inebriated, whatever you want to say, by the wine that she just calmed down, relaxed, and she became Hathor. So I don't give her liquids. I give her pure. I don't give her pure. I give her incense offerings. I give her stick incense. I give her charcoal discs, cone incense. I give her whatever I feel. But a big thing about Sekhmet is that she loves blood. So a big incense to give to her would be dragon's blood. Dragon's blood. I'm trying to think of what else. Dragon's blood. Cinnamon. Sekhmet's big thing. Sekhmet is a fire goddess, so cinnamon is one of her herbs too. So you should give that to her too. And so I just thought as long as I'm talking about this, let's talk about an altar setup. I don't know if I've talked about that yet, but yeah, an altar setup is a big thing. Usually the altar setup is. If it's for one deity, the deity owns the whole altar. If it's for if it's for like two deities, half of it you split it up into half. But here's where the Egyptian part gets very confusing. If it's for three deities, you have to find a way to fit three separate representations of that deity onto the altar. I have done this, and I don't think you guys really understand this, but I don't think you guys can really see this, but my goddesses are known as the Eye of Ra, and so you see that I have an eye on my altar, and I might put a picture of that at the end, I'm not sure. But you see that I have an eye on my altar, and that obviously means that's obviously a representation of all three goddesses right there. So I've pretty much fit all the goddesses into the altar, but I choose to add more stuff. I recently cleaned off my altar, so it's not as messy as before, but I have stuff on there charging constantly. I have crystals and shells that I use for working, and candles and candle holders and water and holy water. And another thing about giving offerings, water is always a good offering. Water is the best offering that you can give to any ancient Egyptian deity, especially an ancient Egyptian deity of the Nile. I don't think that none of my deities are actually associated with the Nile except for Sekhmet. Because, okay, let me explain this to you. What the sun god Ra did is that he mixed the wine in with the water of the Nile, and she drank so much that the Nile receded. So she's connected to the receding of the Nile as well as to the sickness and death of people, because she's also seen as a goddess of sickness and healing. So we'll talk about that later when we talk more about the deities of ancient Egypt. But I think I've covered everything I wanted to cover, so I think I'm just going to talk a little bit more about some things that I'm going to be teaching. I know that some people specifically wanted to know about ancient Egyptian astrology, so I'm going to teach that. I'm going to talk about that. That's in a video coming up. I'm going to talk about some basic tools to ancient Egyptian magic. A basic tool that I use a lot is beads. And I don't know if you can see my beads, but the ancient Egyptians used beads too. If you ever go to an ancient Egyptian exhibit at any museum, you'll kind of notice that that their beads are more made out of crystals, like lapis lazuli. The lapis lazuli was actually worn by the ancient Egyptian pharaoh and the princes and the queens to while they slept, to give them visions. And that's how the ancient Egyptians believed that the deities spoke to them, through their visions and through candle gazing and fire gazing and water gazing. And it's a big thing. And so we're going to talk about crystals in ancient Egypt. We're going to talk about the beats. We're going to talk about altar setups, basic tools. And tools really depend on what deity you choose to work with. Like if you choose to work with the goddess of war, or if you choose to work with the god of war, you choose to work with Thoth, or you choose to work with Ra, or you choose to work with Horus. Get out of there! Get out! I'm sorry, that was the dog. It really depends on what you choose to do. So this was just a short video. Well, it's not really short, but this was just a video talking about some stuff that I thought you guys needed to know, and I hope that it helped. And so, bye.